welcome to LogicTalks. My name is Mark Banfield and I'm Chief Revenue Officer here at LogicMonitor. Today we're really pleased to be joined by Nancy Gohring. Nancy works for 451 Research. She's responsible for application and performance monitoring, and she just recently completed a really interesting report on the impact that COVID-19 is having on the industry. And we're really pleased to have her here with us today. Welcome, Nancy.
Thanks for having me.
Nancy, maybe just to start with, just give us a quick understanding on 451 Research and the background on the company and specifically your role.
Sure, yeah. We're obviously a research firm, and I specifically follow application and infrastructure performance, which means that I spend my days talking to vendors that do APM, infrastructure monitoring, log analytics, and sort of related segments. And then I also obviously talk to enterprises about their needs and offer some advice in terms of how to fill those needs.
Great. Well, we're really pleased to have you. So just to start off with, clearly COVID-19 is having such severe impact on all aspects of society all over the world, and on all kinds of different businesses, all kinds of different industries, all kinds of different verticals. Could you perhaps comment on some of the impacts and trends that you're seeing recently?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously from a very big picture, it is clear that the impact is very sector specific, right? So obviously if you're in travel, you're in trouble. But then there's other businesses that are really benefiting, that they're seeing the upside, right? If you're in distance learning or have any other sort of streaming offering or something like that, you're going to be doing probably better than you were. What's interesting is, so we did this survey it was sort of early days of when people were being quarantined. So this was the second half of March that we ran this survey. So one of the questions we asked people is, are you feeling strain on your IT resources? And 57% of respondents said, yeah, indeed they were. And that's, again, probably pretty obvious. And I think that strain can come from a couple of different sources. One would be internal, right? So if suddenly all of your people who were previously working in an office have now shifted home, that's a different type of workload, right? Maybe everyone's coming in through a VPN. How does that impact your internal resources? It could also be external, right? So some of these businesses that have seen a spike in end users accessing apps and service are also going to see a strain on IT resources. What I thought was interesting, though, is we asked an additional question, which is, how are you keeping up with that, right? So how are your resources keeping up with this increased strain? And not quite half, just a little below half, said pretty good. And I thought that was interesting. Again, that was early days, but I think it indicates a decent shift in the market that has already happened towards digital transformation, maybe cloud pickup, right? Because if you're on cloud, scaling is a lot easier. So some pretty interesting kind of broad trends that we've seen starting in those early days.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And we definitely see the same. I mean, certainly I'm seeing that companies that are more digitized and have been through more digital transformation initiatives are certainly coping better with the current situation than ones that perhaps haven't. So
certainly, yeah.
So your recent report mentions the pressures on digital properties to perform well escalates as the world moves entirely away from physical commerce to digital. What are some of the steps that businesses can take to meet the digital expectations of their customers?
Sure. Yeah, so just to step back for a second, we did a survey just before COVID-19 where we asked consumers whether or not they would switch the app or service or subscription they were using due to poor or buggy performance. And nearly 75% of respondents said somewhat or very likely. So we already knew that people were willing to ditch an app or service because it performed poorly. So if you're a business and this describes you, right, you've got to really ensure that your apps and services are performing really well. I mean, obviously you need really good insight into your applications and infrastructure. And so that could mean switching the tools that you use, despite the fact that this is a chaotic time. I mean, you might need to take that on right now. Some people might already be using sort of the appropriate tool that can give them the visibility they need. I think now is also a really good time to think about other ways that those tools might be able to serve you. So, you can use your monitoring tools to take a really close look at how you're using your cloud services and whether or not you are paying for resources that you aren't using. That's a great way to cut costs at a time when people are looking for really any way to cut costs, right? You can use your monitoring tools to segment your customer base so that when you have a performance issue, you can zero in on your really high value customers and maybe do some proactive outreach to them so that they don't leave, right? So that they're not part of those 75% of people that decide to dump you because of a performance issue. You can use your monitoring tools to just do a better job of correlating performance issues with the impact on the business so that when you have multiple issues, you can better prioritize which ones to focus on. So, those, I think everyone is sort of scrambling, but I think those are really interesting use cases for monitoring tools that can actually be incredibly useful right now.
Yeah. So Nancy, we have so many interesting use cases on how people use LogicMonitor for monitoring all kinds of different things. I mean, effectively anything with an IP connection can be monitored. And our customers have found really interesting ways to digitize their businesses by monitoring all kinds of things. For example, we have a companies in the area of pest control management and literally monitors down to mouse traps, which is really innovative and very different, and maybe talks a little bit about how they view digital transformation. So why do you think some companies find it easier to digitize than others? And give me some examples on what you see happening in the market there.
Yeah, I honestly really think it's a culture issue, right? So some companies I just think are they have a harder time maybe thinking outside the box a little bit, or recognize or being willing to experiment with interesting ways that you can apply technology. And I think that there are so many interesting examples out there of ways that most people would never think that new technology can have an impact. So I mean, you just mentioned this mousetrap example. I think, most people out there would be like, what? Like, why would you need to, digitize mousetraps, or how could you do it, or what would the benefit be, right? But clearly someone has discovered a way that makes sense. So again, I would argue that it's really a cultural thing, and that there's so many different industries can really benefit from different forms of digital transformation. And again, I do think it's really a cultural thing.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good input. I mean, it sort of makes me think that the more creative you are, the more visionary you are, the more you'll find opportunities to digitize elements of what you do.
That's
manual processes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, interesting.
So what are you hearing from 451 research enterprise clients when it comes to the need for tools like infrastructure monitoring and intelligence? What tools are most essential in this new world of remote workforces and digital commerce?
I mean, frankly, a lot hasn't changed in terms of the best practices. So a couple trends I'm seeing. One is in APM, I think that there's a growing recognition that there's different types of tools that you can use to get insight into applications that might be appropriate depending on the application. So there's some applications that a more traditional approach to APM that gives you code level visibility might be suited for. There's other maybe very cloud native applications that distributed tracing could be a really good tool for giving you good visibility. And then there's these sort of lightweight APM type of tools that are coming out that do a really good job of correlating the application layer to the infrastructure layer, and those tools can be really helpful in other scenarios. But across the board, I think the really important thing is, as you're thinking about these tools, is to be really aware of tool sprawl issues, right? Because this is I think as people try to solve monitoring problems, they tend to just throw more tools at it, and that begins to create new problems. So you want to think about how you can correlate the data that you're collecting across this tool set, and that's really going to give you the best visibility.
That's great. Thank you. So with regards to CFOs, I mean, many CFOs around the world would probably say that now isn't the best time to invest in new software and technologies. In your mind, however, why is making investments in application infrastructure performance area more important now than ever before?
Yeah, and actually, what we found in our survey, and again, this was the second half of March, so things can evolve. But even then, it was pretty apparent that there was going to be, a huge economic impact to the coronavirus. And what was interesting is that people weren't putting the brakes on their IT resource investment. So something like 34% of people said they actually plan to increase their spending in IT resources and assets. 60-some% said it would stay the same. And it was only in the ballpark of 3% of people who said they were planning to decrease spending on IT resources and assets. So I thought that was really interesting, and to me indicated a really broad awareness of how important technology is in this current environment. And so, from a monitoring perspective, I think, again, it's become really apparent that your digital properties are incredibly important to your business right now, and they have to perform really well. And a lot of times, the tools are already there. It's just a matter of beginning to use them, or maybe using them in a slightly different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so based on the insights and the revelations from your research that you're doing, what would you say are some of the key takeaways and recommendations you have for companies to help them through these challenging times and the obstacles that they're facing due to COVID-19?
Yeah. It's interesting because I think that your gut reaction when a huge crisis like this hits is to pause everything, pull back on everything, reassess, right? Anything particularly that's going to involve investments. But what's interesting is that when again, in this same survey, what we found, we asked people specifically, have you put a pause, or do you expect to pause strategic initiatives? And almost half, it was something like 45% of people said no, they're going to continue with their IT initiatives. And in a lot of cases, I think that is probably indicative of people that recognize that some of these initiatives are actually really well suited to now. So for instance, cloud migration, right? So if you need to scale down, you want to be able to save money. You don't want to have invested in this enormous data center that's now just a sunk cost, right? If you're in the cloud, you scale back, you save some money. So we're beginning to actually see that even beyond our survey, that really seems to be the case. So we just saw a bunch of earnings results from the big cloud providers. They all reported really strong first quarter results and reported that their second quarter pipelines are very strong. And there was this super interesting quote from Satya Nadella at Microsoft, who said something like they've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation efforts occur within 2 months. So it seems like the market is really pursuing these digital transformation strategies because they recognize that when the world has sort of shifted away from a physical environment that can drive revenue to a digital world, those investments are really necessary. It's what you got to do to continue to drive revenue.
So thanks so much today, Nancy, for spending some time with us. It was some amazing and really valuable insight for so many people to learn from. Is there anything you'd like to close out with before we wrap up today?
No, just encouraging people to be open and drive your culture to be open to new efforts that can really help during this crisis. And thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome, and thanks so much for being with us. So that's us today. Thank you very much for attending. Please do go over to our YouTube channel. Go and check out all the other videos that we've done with customers and other industry experts and be sure to subscribe there so you can keep up to date with Logic Talks.